Let's begin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway as James Sanderson pulled his black SUV into the garage. 3 days in Chicago, back-to-back investor meetings, and a delayed flight had left him exhausted. He grabbed his briefcase and overnight bag, already thinking about the hot shower waiting for him inside. The house was quiet when he entered through the kitchen door. Too quiet. James set down his bags and checked his watch. 4:30. His son Theodore should have been home from school by now, probably upstairs doing homework or lost in one of his adventure books. "Theo," James called out, loosening his tie as he walked toward the staircase. "Dad." The response came immediately, followed by the thunder of small feet racing down the hallway above. 7-year-old Theodore appeared at the top of the stairs, his face lighting up with the kind of pure joy that still made James's chest tighten even after all these years of single parenting. The boy launched himself down the stairs and into James's arms. James caught him easily, lifting him up despite the protest from his tired shoulders. "Hey buddy, miss me?" "So much. Grandma Alberta made me practice piano for an hour every day, and she wouldn't let me play outside because she said the pollen count was too high, whatever that means." Theodore's words tumbled out in a rush, but James noticed something off in his son's eyes. A hesitation, a shadow that didn't belong in a 7-year-old's gaze. "Where is Grandma?" James asked, setting Theodore down but keeping a hand on his shoulder. "In the kitchen making dinner. She's been here the whole time you were gone." Theodore's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Dad, can we talk? Upstairs?" James felt the first flutter of unease in his gut. In the 2 years since his wife Alicia's death, her mother Alberta Hahn had become a constant presence in their lives. At first, James had welcomed the help a grieving widower trying to raise a young son while building his software company needed all the support he could get. But lately, Alberta's involvement had shifted from helpful to invasive. "Sure, bud. Let's go to your room." Theodore's bedroom was exactly as James had left it. Lego constructions covering every surface, books stacked precariously on the nightstand, a half-finished puzzle spread across the floor. Theodore closed the door carefully, then turned to face his father with an expression far too serious for his age. "Dad, can I stop drinking the juice Grandma makes me take every morning?" The words hit James like ice water. "What juice?" Theodore walked to his closet and pulled out a small plastic container from behind a stack of board games. The liquid inside was a murky amber color, nothing like any juice James had ever seen. "This stuff, she makes me drink a full cup every morning before school. She says it's special vitamins that Mom would have wanted me to have." James took the container, his hands suddenly unsteady. The liquid had an odd, viscous quality to it, and there was a faint medicinal smell when he cracked open the lid. "How long has she been giving you this?" "Since you started traveling more." "Maybe 6 months." Theodore's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to tell you because Grandma said if I complained, it meant I didn't love Mom's memory. But Dad, it tastes really bad, and sometimes after I drink it, my stomach hurts so much I can't eat lunch." 6 months. James felt his vision narrow, rage and fear warring in his chest. He forced himself to breathe, to stay calm for Theodore's sake. "You did the right thing telling me, Theo. Has Grandma given you anything else? Any pills or other drinks?" Theodore shook his head. "Just the juice. Every morning. She watches me drink the whole cup." "James, Theodore, dinner will be ready in 20 minutes." Alberta's voice drifted up from downstairs, artificially cheerful. James put the container carefully on Theodore's desk, then knelt down to meet his son's eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow morning, when Grandma gives you this juice, I want you to pretend to drink it but pour it into the potted plant by the kitchen window when she's not looking. Can you do that?" Theodore nodded, relief flooding his features. "You believe me?" "Of course, I believe you. You're my son, and I trust you completely." James pulled Theodore into a fierce hug. "Everything's going to be okay. I promise." But as he held his boy, James's mind was already racing. Alberta Hahn had lost her daughter 2 years ago when Alicia died in a car accident, a loss that had devastated them all. But if she was giving Theodore some kind of mysterious concoction without James's knowledge or consent, what else had she been doing during his business trips? "Dad?" Theodore's muffled voice came from against James's chest. "Am I in trouble?" "No, bud. Not even a little bit." James pulled back and managed a smile. But I need you to do something else for me. Don't tell Grandma we had this talk, okay? Act normal at dinner. Can you do that? Like a secret agent? Exactly like a secret agent. They went downstairs together, Theodore chattering about his week at school. But James's attention was elsewhere. In the kitchen, Alberta Hahn stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She was 62 but looked younger. Her silver hair styled perfectly, her clothes expensive and pressed. She'd always been meticulous about appearances. James, welcome home. She turned with a practiced smile. I've made your favorite pot roast with all the fixings. You must be exhausted from your trip. It was productive, James said carefully, watching her. Really watching her for the first time in months. Had she always looked at Theodore with that possessive intensity? Had her movements always been this calculated, this controlled? During dinner, James forced himself to make small talk while observing everything. The way Alberta portioned Theodore's food, cutting his meat into smaller pieces than necessary. The way she watched the boy eat, her eyes tracking every bite. The way she touched Theodore's hair, his shoulder, his hand constant, claiming touches that made James's skin crawl now that he was paying attention. I was thinking, Alberta said, as she served dessert. Perhaps I should move into the guest room permanently. It would be so much easier than driving back and forth, and Theodore needs consistent care. Especially with your travel schedule. That's not necessary, James said, keeping his voice even. I'm planning to cut back on travel significantly. Something flickered in Alberta's eyes, annoyance. Fear? It was gone too quickly for James to identify. Well, we can discuss it. I'm sure you're too tired tonight. After dinner, James helped Theodore with his bath and bedtime routine, while Alberta cleaned the kitchen with pointed efficiency. Once Theodore was asleep, James retrieved the container from his son's room and took it to his home office, locking the door behind him. He had built his company, Sanderson Analytics, from nothing into a $15 million enterprise by trusting his instincts and never ignoring red flags. Right now, every instinct he had was screaming danger. James pulled out his phone and called Preston Barlow, his best friend since college and currently a senior researcher at Denver Medical Center. Preston answered on the second ring, his voice still energetic despite the late hour. James, how was Chicago? Did the venture capitalists bite? Preston, I need a favor. A big one, and I needed to stay completely off the record. The levity drained from Preston's voice. What's wrong? I need a toxicology analysis done, and I need it done tonight. Can you meet me at your lab in 30 minutes? Jesus. Yeah, of course. What am I testing? That's what I need you to tell me. 20 minutes later, James stood in Alberta's face, keeping his expression neutral. I'm heading out to check on some server issues at the office. Don't wait up. At this hour? She looked up from her book. Surprise evident. Can't one of your employees handle it? It's sensitive data. I need to handle it personally. The lie came easily. He'd spent 2 years building a company. He knew how to manage appearances. The drive to the medical center took 15 minutes. Preston was waiting in the parking lot, concern etched across his face. He was a few inches shorter than James, with a kind of permanently disheveled look that came from spending more time in labs than in sunlight. All right, show me what you've got. In the brightly lit toxicology lab, James handed over the container. Preston took one look at the murky liquid, and his expression darkened. Where did this come from? My mother-in-law has been giving it to my 7-year-old son every morning for the past 6 months. She told him it's vitamins. Christ, James. Preston immediately pulled on gloves and began preparing slides. This doesn't look like any vitamin supplement I've ever seen. For the next hour, James watched as Preston ran test after test, his friend's face growing progressively more grim. Finally, Preston stepped back from his microscope and turned to James with an expression of barely controlled fury. James, sit down. Just tell me. Sit down. James sank into a chair, his heart pounding. Preston pulled up his analysis on a computer screen, his hands shaking slightly. What I'm about to tell you, we need to call the police right now. This isn't just concerning. He stopped, seeming to search for words. This is attempted murder. The lab suddenly felt too bright, too cold. What's in it? Colchicine. It's an alkaloid extracted from autumn crocus plants. In controlled doses, it's used to treat gout. But what's in that container? Preston pointed at the murky liquid. That's approximately 20 times the therapeutic dose. If your son had been taking this every morning for 6 months, he trailed off, his face pale. Tell me everything. Preston pulled up medical images on his screen. Colchicine poisoning is insidious. It mimics other conditions, stomach pain, nausea, fatigue. Most doctors wouldn't catch it without specifically testing for it. Over time, it causes progressive organ damage. The liver, the kidneys, bone marrow suppression. In children, the effects are magnified because of their smaller body mass. He looked at James with something like horror. If Theodore had continued taking this for another few months, the damage would have been irreversible. Another 6 months beyond that, and he'd be dead. James felt the words like physical blows. You're certain? I'm running confirmation tests now, but yes, I'm certain. Preston moved to his phone. I'm calling 911. This is beyond serious, James. This is... Wait. James stood, his mind shifting into the cold, analytical mode that had made him successful in business. How long before the confirmation tests are done? Maybe another hour. But we already have enough. I need you to document everything. Every test. Every result. Time-stamped, with your professional seal. Can you do that? Yes. But James, and I need you to run one more test. Theodore said. He's been feeling sick after drinking this. Can you determine if there are cumulative effects? If there's already damage? Preston's expression shifted to understanding. You want to know exactly what she's done to him? I want to know everything. James's voice was flat, emotionless. It was the voice he used when firing incompetent executives, when shutting down bad partnerships. The voice that meant someone had crossed a line they could never uncross. Every detail, every consequence. I want a complete report. James, your son needs to see a doctor. Tonight. I know. But Preston, James met his friend's eyes. Whatever you're thinking right now, whatever you're imagining I might do, multiply it by 1,000. Because that woman has been slowly poisoning my child. My only child. The only family I have left. Preston nodded slowly. The police will be involved. But on my timeline, James pulled out his phone and began scrolling through contacts. How long can you keep this under wraps? Legally? I should report this immediately. Preston. His friend sighed. 48 hours. Maybe 72 if I bury the paperwork. But James, if you're planning something, I'm planning justice. Real justice, not whatever slap on the wrist the legal system would give her. James found the contact he was looking for: Maurice Barker, a private investigator he'd used for corporate background checks. She tried to kill my son. Slowly, methodically. For 6 months, she looked Theodore in the eye every morning and fed him poison. You think I'm going to let her sit in a comfortable cell for a few years, maybe get parole for good behavior? What are you going to do? James looked at his friend, and for a moment, Preston saw something in his eyes that made him take an involuntary step back. It wasn't anger. It was colder than that. More absolute. I'm going to find out why. And then I'm going to make sure she wishes she'd never been born. The next morning, James woke Theodore early and drove him to Preston's private clinic under the pretense of a routine checkup. While Alberta was still asleep in the guest room, James had Theodore examined from head to toe. The results made James's blood run cold. Elevated liver enzymes, early signs of kidney stress, low platelet count, nothing that would kill Theodore immediately, but evidence of systematic poisoning that could have been fatal within months if it had continued. He'll recover, Preston assured James in his office, while Theodore played in the waiting room with a nurse. Kids are resilient. We'll start him on supportive therapy, monitor his organ function, and he should be completely fine in a few months. How long before I can tell him? About the poisoning? Preston considered. Psychologically, that's complicated. He's 7. Finding out his grandmother tried to kill him could be traumatic. He deserves to know the truth. Not now, but eventually. James looked through the office window at his son, who was building a tower out of blocks, his laughter echoing down the hallway. Alive. Safe. Because he'd been brave enough to speak up. Preston, I need another favor. Name it. I need you to call Child Protective Services. Tell them I brought Theodore in for a routine checkup and you discovered evidence of potential poisoning. File the report with my name and Alberta's, but request that they give me 48 hours before any formal investigation begins. Tell them it's to protect the child's emotional well-being. Preston leaned back in his chair. You're building a legal shield. I'm protecting my son and myself. When this goes public, I want every authority to know I did everything by the book. I reported it. I got my son medical care. I cooperated fully. And in those 48 hours, James smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm going to have a conversation with my dear mother-in-law. James returned home to find Alberta in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Theodore was at the table, and James watched as Alberta poured that familiar, murky liquid into a glass and set it in front of his son. Drink up, sweetheart. Mom's special vitamins. Theodore looked at James, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The boy lifted the glass, pretended to drink, then coughed and turned toward the window, dumping the contents into the potted plant while Alberta's back was turned. Good boy, Alberta said, not even looking. She'd done this so many times it was routine. Mechanical. Now, eat your eggs. James forced himself to stay calm, to play the role. Alberta, I've been thinking about your offer to move in. Maybe we should discuss it more seriously. Her face lit up with triumph that made James's stomach turn. Really? Oh, James, I think that would be wonderful. Theodore needs stability. And you're always so busy with work. Why don't you and I have lunch today? Just the two of us. We can talk about arrangements, logistics, all of that. I'd love that. She reached across the table and squeezed James's hand, and he had to force himself not to recoil. This woman, who was smiling at him with such fake warmth, had been slowly killing his child. After Theodore left for school, James personally drove him, making sure Alberta couldn't interfere with his morning routine. James returned home and found Alberta practically vibrating with excitement. I've already been thinking about how to rearrange the guest room, she was saying. And of course, Theodore's schedule will need some adjustments. The piano lessons should continue, and I think we should add French tutoring. Alicia always wanted him to be bilingual. Alberta, James interrupted. Sit down. We need to talk. Something in his tone made her pause. Is everything all right? That depends entirely on your next few answers. James sat across from her at the kitchen table, his posture relaxed but his eyes cold. I want you to tell me about the special vitamins you've been giving Theodore. Her face went very still. What about them? What's in them? Just herbal supplements. Things to keep him healthy. Her voice had taken on a defensive edge. Herbal supplements. James pulled out his phone and brought up the toxicology report. Is that what you call 20 times the therapeutic dose of colchicine? The blood drained from Alberta's face. That's right. I had it tested. By a medical professional. Who has already filed a report with Child Protective Services. James leaned forward. So let's try this again, Alberta. Why have you been poisoning my son? For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, to James's shock, she smiled. Not a guilty smile. Not a fearful smile. A satisfied, almost serene smile. Because he's not your son. Not really. James felt the world tilt. What did you just say? Alberta stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. Alicia was going to leave you. Did you know that? 2 weeks before she died, she told me she couldn't take it anymore. Your obsession with work, your absence, the way you prioritized your company over your family. She was going to file for divorce and take Theodore. You're lying. Am I? Check her laptop if you don't believe me. The password is Theodore's birthday. She'd already contacted a lawyer, had the papers drawn up. She was just waiting for the right time to tell you. Alberta turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with hatred. My daughter died because she was distracted, crying about her failing marriage when she should have been paying attention to the road. You killed her as surely as if you'd been driving the car that hit her. James's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. That gives you the right to murder Theodore. Not murder. Mercy. Alberta's voice was eerily calm. Theodore is my daughter's son. Mine. He should be raised by someone who actually loves him, who puts him first. But the courts would never give me custody while you're alive and well. So I thought, if Theodore got sick enough, if you couldn't care for him properly, they'd have to give him to me. You were trying to kill him. I was trying to save him from becoming like you. Cold, distant, obsessed with money and success. She sat back down, folding her hands primly. The colchicine was supposed to make him weak enough that you'd have to rely on me completely. And then, when the time was right, I could prove you were an unfit parent. But you had to go and ruin everything by actually paying attention for once. James stared at this woman who had shared dinners with his family, who had held his hand at Alicia's funeral, who had kissed Theodore goodnight countless times while secretly poisoning him. You're insane. I'm a mother who lost her child because of you. Alberta's voice rose. And I won't lose her son too. Theodore belongs with me. I'm the one who's been here, caring for him, teaching him, shaping him. Not you. Me. The police are going to arrest you. Are they? Based on what evidence? The word of a grief-stricken father who's clearly unstable. Alberta leaned forward. I'll tell them you've been so focused on work that you don't even know what happens in your own home. That Theodore is always with me because you're never here. I'll tell them about the herbal supplements I give him, perfectly legal, perfectly safe supplements, and how you've become paranoid and controlling. Who do you think they'll believe? A devoted grandmother or a workaholic father with an agenda? James let her talk. Let her reveal exactly how deep her delusion ran. Because every word was being recorded by the device Preston had given him, carefully hidden in his watch band. You won't win, Alberta. I already have. You can call the police, file reports, make accusations. But without Theodore in your custody, what do you have? And I promise you, James, if you try to keep my grandson from me, I will make your life a living hell. I'll sue for custody. I'll tell everyone who listened that you're an abusive, negligent parent. You'll do nothing. James stood, his composure finally cracking enough to let his rage show. Because in 48 hours, the police will have a full toxicology report, medical evidence of what you did to Theodore, recordings of this conversation, and witness testimony from multiple medical professionals. You're going to prison, Alberta, and you're never going to see my son again. Her face twisted with fury. You bastard. You tricked me. No. I gave you a chance to tell the truth. You chose to dig yourself deeper. James walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Alberta? Alicia never contacted a divorce lawyer. I know because after she died, I went through every file on her laptop, every email, every document. She was planning our 10-year anniversary trip to Hawaii. She'd made a reservation at the resort where we honeymooned. He looked back at her, and his voice was ice. You're not just a poisoner. You're a liar. And now everyone's going to know it. He left her sitting at the kitchen table, her face a mask of shock and denial, and drove to the police station to file formal charges. Within hours, Alberta Hahn was arrested. Within days, the full scope of her crime was public knowledge. But for James, that wasn't enough. Not even close. Because Alberta had been right about one thing. The legal system would give her a sentence, maybe even a significant one. But it wouldn't make her understand. It wouldn't make her feel the terror Theodore must have felt every morning, drinking poison while his grandmother watched with cold, calculating eyes. For that, James had other plans. Plans that would require patience, resources, and a level of calculated cruelty that James had never thought himself capable of. But for his son, he'd become capable of anything. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after Alberta's arrest. James attended every proceeding, watching as his mother-in-law's expensive lawyers tried to paint her as a grieving grandmother who'd made a mistake, who'd been using traditional herbal remedies without understanding their potency. The prosecution had mountains of evidence. The toxicology reports, Theodore's medical records showing systematic poisoning, the recording of Alberta's confession. But her lawyers were good, and they worked every angle. Mental incompetence, temporary insanity, grief-induced delusion. James sat through it all with a calm expression. But inside, he was working, planning, because he'd learned something important from building his company from nothing. The most effective way to destroy someone wasn't with a single dramatic blow. It was through systematic dismantling, taking away everything they valued piece by piece, until they had nothing left. Alberta valued her reputation, her standing in Denver's social circles, her image as the perfect mother, the devoted grandmother. Her comfortable lifestyle, funded by the generous inheritance Alicia had left her. James was going to take it all. The first blow came from an unexpected source. Cheryl Hudson, Alicia's younger sister who'd always been quiet and deferential around Alberta. She came to James's office one afternoon, 2 weeks before the trial, with a banker's box full of documents. I need to show you something, Cheryl said, setting the box on his desk. After Mom died 5 years ago, Alicia was the executor of her estate. Alberta was supposed to get half. Alicia got half. But look at this. James went through the papers, financial records, bank statements, legal documents. The pattern emerged quickly. Alberta had systematically embezzled from their mother's estate before it was divided. Fake medical bills, falsified care costs, redirected insurance payments. She'd stolen nearly $200,000 from her own daughters. Alicia found out about it. Cheryl continued, her voice tight with emotion. She confronted Alberta 2 months before she died. They had a huge fight. Alicia threatened to report her to the authorities and cut her off financially. She looked up at James with tears in her eyes. What if that's why Alberta blamed you? Because she couldn't face that Alicia died hating her for what she'd done? James studied the documents carefully. Why didn't you come forward before? I was scared. Alberta has always been controlling, intimidating. But after what she did to Theodore, Cheryl's hands trembled. I can't protect her anymore. She's a monster. James made copies of everything and handed the originals back to Cheryl. Give these to the prosecutors. Add financial crimes to her charges. But he kept the copies for himself. Because the legal system wasn't the only court where Alberta would be judged. Denver's elite social scene operated on perception and reputation. Alberta had cultivated her image carefully. The tragic widow, the devoted grandmother, the pillar of the community who volunteered at the children's hospital and chaired fundraising galas. James knew every organization she was involved with, every board she sat on, every society that valued her membership. And he knew that nothing destroyed a reputation faster than betrayal of public trust combined with evidence of moral depravity. He started with the Children's Hospital, where Alberta had volunteered for 15 years. A carefully worded email to the director, attaching the toxicology reports and the criminal complaint with a simple question. Did you know that one of your most prominent volunteers has been arrested for poisoning her 7-year-old grandson? Then the country club, where she'd been a member for 20 years. The gardening society, where she'd won awards for her autumn crocus, displays a detail that made James's stomach turn when he realized she'd literally been growing the poison she used. The charity board that had named a scholarship after Alicia. Each email was factual, unemotional, and devastating. Each one included public court documents that Alberta's lawyers couldn't suppress. Each one asked a variation of the same question. Is this someone your organization wants to be associated with? Within a week, Alberta had been stripped of every voluntary position, removed from every board, and quietly asked to resign from every membership. Her name was removed from the scholarship fund. Her photograph was taken down from the hospital's donor wall. James knew about each loss because he'd tasked Maurice Barker, his private investigator, with documenting everything. Every resignation, every removal, every public distancing from the woman who'd once been Denver society's darling. But he still wasn't done. The criminal trial began on a cold Monday in November. James sat in the front row with Theodore beside him. The boy had insisted on coming, wanted to see the place where the bad thing Grandma did gets fixed. Preston had been right about Theodore's resilience. With proper medical care and therapy, his physical symptoms had resolved quickly. The emotional healing was taking longer. But Dr. Josie Donovan, the child psychologist James had hired, said Theodore was processing the betrayal remarkably well. Kids were adaptable, she'd explained, and Theodore had one crucial advantage. He knew absolutely that his father loved him and would protect him. Alberta was brought in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair showing roots for the first time in James's memory. She'd lost weight, lost the polished veneer that had always defined her. When her eyes found Theodore, something desperate and hungry crossed her face. Theodore squeezed James's hand and looked away. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. Dr. Preston Barlow testified about the toxicology results, his professional calm masking the fury James knew his friend still felt. Theodore's pediatrician testified about the boy's symptoms and recovery. The recording of Alberta's confession played in the silent courtroom. Her voice eerily matter-of-fact as she explained her plan to make Theodore sick enough that James would be deemed an unfit parent. Alberta's defense tried everything. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified that she'd been suffering from complicated grief, that she wasn't in her right mind, that she'd convinced herself she was helping Theodore rather than hurting him. But then Cheryl Hudson took the stand and destroyed that narrative completely. Alberta has always been calculating, Cheryl testified, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She stole from our mother. She manipulated Alicia. She saw Theodore as a possession, something that belonged to her because he was her daughter's child. This wasn't grief or mental illness. This was entitlement. She genuinely believed she had the right to Theodore, and if she couldn't have him legitimately, she'd take him by force. The defense attorney tried to discredit Cheryl, but the financial records spoke for themselves. Fraud, embezzlement, and now attempted murder. The portrait of Alberta Hahn that emerged wasn't of a grieving grandmother, but of a narcissistic sociopath who'd spent decades manipulating everyone around her. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge looked at Alberta with unconcealed disgust. Mrs. Hahn, you betrayed the most fundamental trust that exists, the trust a child places in a caregiver. You looked your grandson in the eye every morning and fed him poison. You did this systematically, calculatingly, and without remorse. The court finds no mitigating circumstances. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison without possibility of parole. Alberta's scream echoed through the courtroom. Her lawyers had to physically restrain her as she tried to lunge toward Theodore, still screaming about how he was hers, how James had stolen him, how this was all a conspiracy to take her family away. Theodore watched it all with wide eyes, then looked up at James. Is she going to be okay? James pulled his son close. That's not our concern anymore, buddy. She made her choices. They left the courthouse together, stepping into bright winter sunshine. Theodore wanted ice cream despite the cold, so they stopped at his favorite shop and sat in the window, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk. Dad? Theodore said around a mouthful of chocolate chip. Dr. Josie asked me if I still loved Grandma Alberta. What did you say? I said I don't know. Is that bad? James shook his head. No, bud. It's honest. Love is complicated, especially when someone hurts you. Do you still love her? I never loved her. I respected her because she was your mom's mother, but love? No. James paused. I love you. That's what matters. Theodore nodded, satisfied, and went back to his ice cream. But James's mind was still working. Because yes, Alberta was in prison. Yes, she'd lost everything. But was it enough? 25 years in a cell, with 3 meals a day and a library and basic medical care. Was that really justice for trying to kill a child? James didn't think so. The problem with revenge, James had learned, was that it required imagination. Anyone could destroy someone through obvious means: violence, public humiliation, financial ruin. But true revenge required understanding what someone valued most and taking it away in a way that left them powerless to fight back. Alberta valued control. She'd built her entire life around being in control of her family, her image, her environment. Even in prison, she'd try to maintain that control however she could. James was going to take it from her, piece by piece, until she had nothing left but the reality of her own actions. He started by purchasing Alicia's childhood home, the house where Alberta had raised her daughters and planned to raise Theodore. Alberta still owned it, but with her assets frozen for restitution and legal fees, she couldn't afford to keep it. James bought it at auction for twice its value, then donated it to a youth shelter for abused and neglected children. Every single item Alberta had stored there, her furniture, her photographs, her mother's antiques, was sold or donated. The house was gutted and renovated, and a plaque was installed at the entrance, the Alicia Watson Memorial Home, in memory of a devoted mother, taken too soon. James made sure Alberta's prison caseworker informed her of the dedication ceremony. Next was Alberta's car collection. She'd been proud of her vintage Cadillac, her luxury sedan, the sports car she'd bought to celebrate her 60th birthday. All were seized as part of her restitution. James bought them at police auction and had them crushed. He sent her photographs of the compacted metal cubes with a simple note, evidence of crimes now disposed of. J.S. But his most effective move came from understanding prison psychology. James had researched extensively, talked to corrections officers, learned how prison social structures worked. Reputation mattered. Respect mattered. And certain crimes were considered unforgivable even by hardened criminals. Child abusers occupied the lowest tier of prison hierarchy. James made absolutely certain that every inmate in Alberta's facility knew exactly what she'd done. Not just that she'd poisoned a child, but how. The premeditation, the 6 months of watching Theodore suffer, the cold calculation of it all. He had Maurice Barker arrange for copies of the trial transcripts to circulate through the prison. Had newspaper articles about the case passed around. Within 2 months of Alberta's incarceration, James received a call from the prison warden. "Mr. Sanderson, I'm calling regarding Alberta Hahn. She's requested protective custody." "Why?" "There have been incidents. Other inmates have made her situation difficult. Nothing we can prove definitively, but she's clearly being targeted." James felt no sympathy. "Is she in physical danger?" "Not immediate danger, no. But quality of life concerns, certainly." "Then, I trust you'll handle it according to standard prison protocols." James paused. "Warden, my mother-in-law tried to murder my 7-year-old son. Whatever she's experiencing now is a fraction of what Theodore experienced every day for 6 months. I have no interest in advocating for her comfort." "Understood, Mr. Sanderson." Alberta was denied protective custody. Standard protocols said she needed to demonstrate actual physical threat, and mere social ostracization didn't qualify. She would spend the next 25 years as a pariah in a community of pariahs, with no friends, no allies, and no one to talk to except guards who knew exactly what she'd done. It still wasn't enough. James's final act of revenge took 6 months to set up and required resources he'd never thought he'd use for something so personal. But watching Theodore slowly heal, seeing his son wake up from nightmares about the juice, watching him flinch every time they visited the doctor, it all reinforced that Alberta had stolen something from Theodore that could never be fully restored. She'd stolen his sense of safety. For that, she deserved to lose hers. Through a network of contacts that James had built during his years in business, he found what he needed: a specialist named Eric Patton who'd spent 20 years in psychological operations for military intelligence before going private. Eric didn't ask questions about legality or ethics. He asked about objectives and budgets. "I want her to understand what she did," James explained during their first meeting. "Not intellectually. She already knows intellectually. I want her to feel it. Every day. The fear, the helplessness, the slow realization that something terrible is happening and there's nothing she can do to stop it." Eric nodded slowly. "Psychological torture. Long-term, sustainable, untraceable." "Exactly. It won't be cheap. I don't care." What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Eric had contacts inside the prison system, guards who could be paid, inmates who could be directed, systems that could be manipulated. Nothing overt, nothing that would leave obvious traces. Alberta's mail started getting lost in processing. Letters from her lawyers, from her few remaining supporters, all mysteriously disappeared. But junk mail, especially medical advertisements for elderly care and funeral services, arrived regularly. Her commissary orders were frequently mixed up. She'd request shampoo and receive antacid medication. She'd order tea and receive cold medicine. Small things, inconvenient things, things that made her feel like she had no control over even basic aspects of her life. The guards started treating her with studied indifference. Not cruelty that would be reportable, just absolute, perfect indifference. When she spoke, they didn't quite hear. When she had requests, paperwork got lost. When she complained, responses were delayed. But the real genius of Eric's plan was the medical aspect. Every few months, Alberta would be called for a routine medical screening. She'd sit in the prison clinic while a doctor, actually one of Eric's contacts, would examine her and mention concerns. Slightly elevated blood pressure, unusual lymph node activity, a shadow on her liver scan that needed monitoring. Nothing definitive, nothing dangerous, just enough to make her wonder, to make her worry, to make her lie awake at night thinking about her health, wondering if something was wrong, if she was sick, if she was dying, just like Theodore had. The reports were always inconclusive. Further testing was always recommended. Results were always delayed. And Alberta, who'd spent 6 months watching her grandson deteriorate from poison she'd administered, now lived in constant fear that she was dying too. James received monthly updates from Eric. Alberta had lost more weight. She wasn't sleeping. She'd become paranoid, convinced the other inmates were poisoning her food. She'd started refusing to eat from the commissary, only eating the prison-issued meals, which were notoriously terrible. She's breaking, Eric reported during their 6th-month check-in. The guards say she cries at night, talks to herself. She's requested psychiatric evaluation 3 times. And prison psychiatrist says she's anxious and depressed but doesn't meet the threshold for medication or special treatment. She's just miserable. Eric leaned back in his chair. The question is, how long do you want to continue this? James thought about Theodore, who'd just had his 8th birthday party, who'd laughed with his friends and blown out candles on a massive cake, who was happy and healthy and healing because James had listened to him, believed him, protected him. Forever, James said, or until she actually does get sick and dies. Whichever comes first. 2 years after Alberta's incarceration, James received an unexpected visitor at his office. Cheryl Hudson, looking healthier than he'd ever seen her, with a confident smile that was new. "I came to say thank you," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "For what?" "For stopping her. For protecting Theodore. For making her face consequences." Cheryl paused. "For showing me that I didn't have to be afraid of her anymore." "How are you doing?" "Better. I'm in therapy. Working through a lot of stuff about how she controlled me, manipulated me, how she kept me under her thumb for decades." Cheryl shook her head. "Did you know she used to tell me I was stupid? Every day, some variation of 'you're not smart like your sister', 'you're not pretty like your sister', 'you're not capable like your sister.' I believed it for 40 years. You're none of those things. I know that now, and it's liberating." Cheryl pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's a letter Alicia wrote me 2 weeks before she died. I found it in some old boxes I was going through." James opened the envelope carefully. Alicia's handwriting filled 2 pages, talking about Theodore's first day of kindergarten, about a new recipe she'd tried, about her and James's plans to renovate the kitchen. And at the end, "James has been working so hard lately, and I know I complain about it sometimes. But Cheryl, I'm so proud of him. He's building something real, something lasting. And when I see him with Theodore, when I watch them together, I know we're going to be okay. I know our family is strong enough to weather anything. I love him so much it scares me sometimes." James read it twice, tears blurring his vision. "Thank you for this. She never wanted to leave you, James. Whatever Alberta told you, whatever lies she told herself, Alicia loved you. She was happy." After Cheryl left, James sat in his office for a long time, holding Alicia's letter. Alberta had tried to poison his memories, along with his son, had tried to make him doubt himself, his marriage, his worth as a father and husband, but she'd failed. Just like she'd failed to kill Theodore. Just like she'd failed to escape justice. Alberta Hahn had lost everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her family, her control, and her peace of mind. She would spend the rest of her life in a cage, paranoid and isolated, never knowing if the medical scares were real or manufactured, never having a moment's true rest. And James? He'd protected his son, honored his wife's memory, and built a life that would have made Alicia proud. That was the real victory. Not that Alberta had fallen, but that James and Theodore had risen. On Theodore's 10th birthday, 3 years after the trial, James took him to visit Alicia's grave. They brought flowers. Theodore insisted on her favorites, white lilies, and stood in the quiet cemetery while autumn leaves fell around them. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" Theodore asked. "She'd be incredibly proud. You're smart, kind, brave. Everything she hoped you'd be." "What about Grandma Alberta? Do you think she thinks about what she did?" James considered the question carefully. Eric had recently reported that Alberta had been moved to the prison's medical wing for observation after a panic attack. She was convinced she was dying, though every test came back normal. The irony wasn't lost on James. "I think she thinks about herself," James answered honestly. "Some people are only capable of that. That's sad." "Yeah, buddy, it is." Theodore placed the flowers carefully at the base of Alicia's headstone. "Dad, I'm glad you're my dad. I'm glad you protected me." James pulled his son into a hug, this brave, wonderful boy who'd saved his own life by speaking up. "I'll always protect you, Theo. Always." They walked back to the car together, Theodore chattering about his birthday party plans. James listened, responded, laughed at his son's jokes. This was happiness. This was victory. A normal day with his son, unencumbered by fear or poison or lies. Alberta had tried to take this from him, had tried to steal his child, his joy, his future. She failed. And in her failure, in her complete and total destruction, James had found a peace he'd never expected. Not the peace of forgiveness, he would never forgive her for what she'd done, but the peace of knowing that justice, real justice, had been served. Alberta Hahn would spend every remaining day of her miserable life knowing she'd lost, that she'd destroyed herself through her own arrogance and cruelty, that the grandson she'd tried to claim was growing up happy, healthy, and loved without her. That was enough. Finally, after all of it, that was enough. James looked at Theodore in the rearview mirror as they drove home, watching his son sing along to the radio without a care in the world. This was what winning looked like. Not revenge, not destruction, but this. A child who felt safe, who trusted his father, who could sing silly songs and plan birthday parties and dream about the future. Alberta Hahn was rotting in a cell, tormented by fears she couldn't name and a paranoia she couldn't escape. Theodore was free. James had made sure of it. And he'd do it all again, without hesitation, if it meant keeping his son safe. That was the real victory. That was the real justice. And that was the end of Alberta Hahn's story, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating knowledge that she'd lost everything while the family she'd tried to destroy thrived without her. Poetic justice, James thought. The very best kind. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.